The wagon rattled into Lyndon, Kansas on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman who looked like she had been through hell and back. And Yates Owens watched from his ranch office window as the dust settled around her determined figure. She climbed down from that wagon with more grace than any woman had a right to possess after 3 days on rough roads, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her traveling dress covered in the kind of dust that told stories of desperation and long journeys. Yates set down his ledger and walked out onto the porch of the main house, his boots echoing on the weathered wood. The woman was already talking to his foreman, Miguel Rodriguez, gesturing toward the collection of buildings that made up the sprawling ranch operation. Miguel nodded, pointed toward Yates, and the woman turned to look at him with eyes the color of strong coffee, eyes that held intelligence and something else, something that made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt in years. "Mr. Owens." She called out, her voice carrying across the yard with surprising strength. "I am Penelope Bartlett. I understand you need a cook." Yates descended the steps slowly, taking his time to assess this unexpected arrival. He had indeed placed an advertisement in several newspapers across Kansas and Missouri, desperate to find someone who could feed his 20 ranch hands something better than the charred meat and watery beans they had been suffering through since old Cookie had died last spring. But he had not expected anyone like this. Most women who came west alone were either running from something or running towards something equally desperate. "I did place an advertisement," Yates acknowledged, stopping a respectful distance from her. "But I expected responses through the mail, not someone showing up unannounced." Penelope Bartlett lifted her chin, and he saw the pride there, the kind of pride that came from having nothing left to lose but refusing to surrender anyway. "I do not have time for letters and negotiations, Mr. Owens. I need employment immediately, and you need a cook. I can prepare meals for large groups. I can work with limited supplies, and I can start today if you will have me." There was something in her voice, a tremor beneath the steel, that told Yates she was not exaggerating about the immediacy of her need. He glanced at Miguel, who shrugged in that way that meant the decision was entirely up to the boss. The afternoon sun beat down on all of them, and Yates could see the weariness in Penelope Bartlett's posture, the way she held herself rigid as if she might collapse if she allowed herself to relax even for a moment. "Where are you coming from?" Yates asked. "St. Louis," she replied without hesitation. "My husband died 6 months ago. The debts he left behind took everything. I have no family, no prospects, and considerable skill in a kitchen. I saw your advertisement in the Kansas City newspaper 2 weeks ago and have been traveling since." The bluntness of her statement impressed him. No tears, no elaborate sob story, just facts delivered with the kind of practical resignation that Yates understood in his bones. Life in Kansas Territory was hard, and it got harder every year. People who survived out here were the ones who could look reality in the face and keep moving forward anyway. "The pay is $30 a month, room and board included," Yates said. "You will have a cabin to yourself, small but private. You will be responsible for 3 meals a day for the hands, plus whatever I need at the main house. The men work hard and they eat accordingly. Can you handle that?" "I can handle that and more," Penelope said, and there was no boast in her tone, just simple confidence. "Then welcome to the ranch, Miss Bartlett," Yates said, deliberately using the title that restored her unmarried status in his mind, though he knew it was improper. "Miguel will show you to your cabin and the cookhouse. We eat at 6, noon and 6. I expect you will need some time to familiarize yourself with the supplies and equipment." "I will have supper ready at 6, Penelope said firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Owens." She turned to follow Miguel before Yates could respond, and he watched her walk away with that same determined grace, her spine straight despite what had to be bone-deep exhaustion. Something stirred in his chest again, something he had thought dead and buried along with his young wife Sarah, who had succumbed to fever 5 years ago, leaving him alone in this big house with nothing but work and memories. Yates shook his head and returned to his office, but he found he could not concentrate on the ledgers anymore. The numbers blurred together as his mind kept returning to the image of Penelope Bartlett climbing down from that wagon, all fierce determination and barely concealed desperation. He knew that combination well. It was written into the very soil of Kansas, into every homestead and ranch that struggled against drought, locusts, harsh winters, and the simple grinding reality of trying to build something lasting in a place that seemed determined to break anyone foolish enough to try. At 6 o'clock precisely, Yates walked into the cookhouse and stopped dead in his tracks. The long tables were set with actual plates instead of the battered tin the men had been using, and the smell that filled the air made his mouth water instantly. Penelope stood at the massive stove, her dress now protected by a practical apron, her hair still pulled back but with small curls escaping around her face from the heat. She was ladling stew into a serving pot, and beside it sat fresh biscuits, golden and perfect, steam rising from their split tops. The ranch hands filed in behind Yates, their usual rowdy conversation dying away as they too caught the scent of real cooking. Miguel let out a low whistle of appreciation, and young Tommy Fredericks, barely 19 and still growing into his lanky frame, looked like he might cry from sheer joy. "Gentlemen," Penelope said, turning to face them with a large spoon in her hand, "supper is ready. I expect you to wash your hands before you eat at my tables, and I expect you to behave like civilized human beings. Anyone who wants seconds is welcome to them, but there will be no waste. Am I understood?" There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Miguel grinned. "Yes, madam," he said, and headed immediately to the wash basin. The other hands followed suit, and Yates found himself impressed all over again. She had taken command of the cookhouse in less than 6 hours, establishing rules and expectations with the kind of natural authority that could not be taught. Yates washed his hands and took his usual seat at the head of the table, watching as Penelope served the men with efficient grace. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables. The biscuits were light and buttery, and there was even a pot of coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of mud. The hands ate with the kind of focused intensity that spoke better than any words about the quality of the meal. "Miss Bartlett," Yates said when the eating had slowed enough for conversation, "this is exceptional." "Thank you, Mr. Owens," Penelope replied, refilling his coffee cup. "I found your pantry adequately stocked, though I will need to make a list of items for your next trip to town." "Whatever you need," Yates said, and meant it. If she could produce meals like this consistently, he would buy her anything she required. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt almost miraculous after months of barely edible food. Penelope proved to be as good as her word, producing hearty breakfasts before dawn, substantial midday meals, and suppers that had the hands looking forward to the end of their workday with new enthusiasm. But Yates began to notice that she was doing more than just cooking. On the 3rd day, he found her in the chicken coop, reorganizing the laying boxes and muttering to herself about efficiency. On the 5th day, she was examining the vegetable garden that had been left to grow wild and making notes on a piece of paper. On the 7th day, she appeared at his office door with a list that made his eyebrows rise. "What is this?" he asked, scanning the detailed itemization of supplies, tools, and materials. "It is what you need to run this ranch properly," Penelope said, her tone brooking no argument. "Your cookhouse equipment is outdated and inefficient. Your chicken coops are poorly maintained. Your vegetable garden could feed twice as many men if it were properly cultivated, and your supply ordering system is chaotic at best." Yates leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And you think you can fix all of this?" "I know I can," Penelope said, "but I need your authorization to make changes." There was a challenge in her eyes, a test to see if he was the kind of man who could handle a woman with opinions and initiative, or if he was the kind who would be threatened by competence. Yates had built this ranch from nothing over the past 12 years, had fought drought and debt and every imaginable setback, and he recognized a valuable asset when he saw one. "Do what needs doing," he said simply. "If you need money, come to me. If you need the hands to help with heavy work, tell Miguel. But understand that if you take this on, I will hold you accountable for the results." Penelope smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I would expect nothing less, Mr. Owens." She was gone before he could respond, and Yates sat alone in his office, wondering what exactly he had just set in motion. The answer became clear over the following weeks, as Penelope Bartlett systematically took over the organizational aspects of ranch life, that Yates had been too busy or too indifferent to manage properly. She reorganized the pantry with ruthless efficiency, creating a system that made it easy to see what supplies were running low. She took over the ordering, dealing directly with the merchants in Lyndon and negotiating prices with a shrewdness that saved the ranch money. She revitalized the vegetable garden, enlisting young Tommy to help with the heavy digging in exchange for extra desserts, and soon fresh greens and herbs were appearing on the table. She even tackled the ranch's chaotic record-keeping, pointing out to Yates that he was losing track of expenses and income in ways that could become serious problems. "You are a rancher, not an accountant," she said one evening when she appeared at his office with yet another list of suggestions. "But you need someone who can manage the business side of things properly." "And that someone is you?" Yates asked, but there was no challenge in his voice, only curiosity. "My husband was a merchant," Penelope said, her voice carefully neutral. "I handled his books for 8 years. I know how to track income and expenses, how to project seasonal variations, and how to identify problems before they become catastrophic. Let me help you, Mr. Owens." Yates looked at the ledgers spread across his desk, the evidence of his own inadequacy in this area, and made a decision that felt both risky and absolutely right. "Show me what you can do." That night began a partnership that transformed not just the ranch's operations but something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Penelope spent evenings in Yates' office, going through years of poorly maintained records, creating systems and projections that revealed the ranch's actual financial position. It was better than Yates had feared but worse than he had hoped, and her frank assessment of the situation felt like a relief after years of muddling through on instinct and hope. They worked side by side, their conversations moving gradually from purely business matters to more personal topics. Yates found himself telling her about Sarah, about the fever that had taken her so suddenly, about the guilt he still carried for not being able to save her. Penelope listened without offering empty platitudes, and when she shared her own story, he understood why. "Robert was not a good man," she said quietly one evening, her pen still moving across the ledger page. "I married him because I was young and foolish and thought I had no other options. He was charming at first, but the charm hid debts and gambling and a dozen other vices. When he died, I thought I would finally be free, but instead I discovered that his debts were now mine. Everything we owned was seized. I had nothing left but my skills and my determination not to let his mistakes destroy me. You could have remarried, Yates said carefully. A woman with your abilities would have had options. Penelope looked up at him, her brown eyes fierce in the lamplight. I will never put myself under another man's control like that again. Whatever I build now, I build for myself. The words should have been off-putting, should have made Yates defensive, but instead he found them admirable. There was a strength in Penelope Bartlett that matched the strength required to survive in Kansas, a refusal to surrender to circumstances that he recognized in his own bones. I respect that, he said simply, and the look she gave him held surprise and something that might have been the first stirrings of trust. The summer faded into autumn, and the ranch settled into its new rhythms under Penelope's efficient management. The hands had stopped thinking of her as just the cook, and started deferring to her on matters of supply, scheduling, and organization. Miguel joked that she was running the place, but there was truth beneath the humor, and Yates found he did not mind. Penelope had a gift for seeing inefficiencies and fixing them, for anticipating problems before they developed, and her presence had improved life at the ranch in ways that went far beyond good food. But it was more than just her competence that drew Yates. It was the way she laughed at Tommy's terrible jokes, the way she fussed over Miguel's arthritis during cold mornings, the way she had gradually transformed the cookhouse into a place that felt like home rather than just a feeding station. It was the quiet evenings in his office when they worked together in comfortable silence, the occasional brush of her hand against his when they reached for the same paper, the growing awareness that he looked forward to seeing her in ways that had nothing to do with ranch business. Yates had not thought about courting anyone since Sarah's death. The idea had seemed disloyal at first, and then simply impossible. What woman would want to tie herself to a struggling rancher in the middle of Kansas? But Penelope was already here, already integral to his life in ways that made his chest tighten when he thought about her leaving. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that promised harder weather to come. Yates was in the barn checking on the horses when he heard raised voices from the direction of the main yard. He hurried out to find Penelope facing down a man on horseback, her small frame somehow managing to look formidable despite the obvious size difference. "I told you to leave," Penelope was saying, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You have no business here." "I have business with you," the man said, and Yates recognized the slurred speech of someone who had been drinking. "You think you can just run off and leave your obligations?" "You owe me money, Penelope. Robert owed me money and that debt passed to you." "I owe you nothing, Chester," Penelope snapped. "Robert's gambling debts died with him and you know it." "Maybe legally," the man called Chester said, "but morally. You think you can just start over like none of it happened. I want what I am owed." Yates strode forward, positioning himself between Penelope and the mounted man. "I think the lady has made herself clear. You need to leave." Chester focused on Yates with difficulty, his red-rimmed eyes struggling to make sense of this new element. "Who the hell are you?" "I am Yates Owens, and this is my ranch. Miss Bartlett is under my protection. Whatever disputes you think you have with her, you can take them up with a lawyer or the sheriff, but you are not going to settle them here. Now get moving before I have my men remove you." Miguel and several other hands had appeared at the sound of the argument, and their presence made the threat real. Chester looked around, calculating his odds, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "This is not over," he muttered, but he turned his horse and rode off toward Lyndon, weaving slightly in the saddle. Yates turned to Penelope, who was shaking with reaction, her arms wrapped around herself. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, but her voice was unsteady. "I apologize." I did not think anyone from my old life would follow me here. Come inside, Yates said gently. We should talk about this. They went into his office and Yates poured her a small glass of whiskey despite her protests. Drink, he ordered. You have had a shock. Penelope obeyed, coughing slightly at the burn, but color returned to her cheeks. Chester Williams was Robert's closest friend and worst influence. They gambled together, drank together, and lost money together. When Robert died, Chester tried to claim I owed him for various supposed loans and debts. I proved to the courts in St. Louis that I had no legal obligation, but Chester has never accepted it. I had hoped that coming all the way to Kansas would be far enough to escape him. How much does he claim you owe? Yates asked. $300, Penelope said bitterly. Money I do not have for debts I never incurred, but Chester is not rational about it. He blames me for Robert's death somehow, as if I caused the heart attack that killed him. Yates thought about the amount, which was substantial but not impossible. He thought about Penelope's pride, her fierce independence, and the careful way she was not asking him for help even though the request hung unspoken in the air. He thought about how much she had already done for the ranch, how much more valuable she was than any amount of money. I will handle Chester Williams, Yates said finally. No, Penelope said immediately. This is my problem, not yours. You work for me, which makes it my problem when someone shows up drunk and making threats, Yates countered. Let me handle this my way. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that went beyond employer and employee, beyond simple friendship. Penelope nodded slowly, accepting his protection even as he could see it cost her pride to do so. The next morning, Yates rode into Lyndon and found Chester Williams nursing a hangover in the town's single saloon. Yates sat down across from him without invitation and laid $300 on the table between them. This is for whatever debt you think Penelope Bartlett owes you, Yates said coldly. Take it, and understand that if I see you on my property again, if I hear that you have bothered Miss Bartlett in any way, I will not be as generous. Am I clear? Chester stared at the money, greed and anger warring on his florid face. Who are you to buy her debts? I am someone who pays his obligations, Yates said, which is more than can be said for her late husband or, apparently, for you. Take the money and leave Kansas. There is nothing for you here. Chester grabbed the bills, counted them twice, and stuffed them into his pocket. She always did land on her feet, he muttered, but he was already standing, already calculating how long $300 would last him elsewhere. Yates watched him leave and felt a grim satisfaction. The money would hurt the ranch's finances, would set back some of his plans for spring expansion, but it was worth it to know that Penelope was safe from this particular ghost of her past. When he returned to the ranch that evening, Penelope was waiting for him in his office, and she knew immediately what he had done. You paid him, she said, her voice flat. I did, Yates confirmed. I told you not to. I know. Penelope stood abruptly, her hands clenched at her sides. You had no right. That was my debt, my problem, my responsibility. It was a debt you did not owe, Yates said, rising to face her, and I had every right to protect someone under my care. I am not a charity case, Mr. Owens, Penelope said, her voice rising. I came here to build something of my own, not to trade one form of dependence for another. I know that, Yates said, and suddenly he was tired of the careful distance they had been maintaining, tired of pretending that what he felt was simple employer concern. I did not pay that money because I think you are weak or incapable. I paid it because Chester Williams is dangerous and unpredictable, and I could not stand the thought of him threatening you. I paid it because you matter to me, Penelope. More than you should, more than is probably wise, but there it is. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and Penelope stared at him with wide eyes. "Yates," she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name, the first time she had dropped the careful formality that had governed their interactions. "I am not asking you for anything," Yates continued, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know you value your independence. I know you have no interest in giving up control of your life to any man. But I needed you to know that my interest in your welfare goes beyond what you contribute to this ranch. You have become important to me in ways that have nothing to do with your cooking or your organizational skills or any of the practical reasons I should value your presence here." Penelope closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I cannot be what you need," she said softly. "I cannot be the kind of wife Sarah was, sweet and domestic and content to let you make all the decisions. I am too damaged, too determined to control my own fate, too much everything that a man like you should not want." "You are everything I want," Yates said, taking a careful step closer. "Not despite who you are, but because of it. I do not need another Sarah. I need someone who challenges me, who sees problems and fixes them, who has the strength to survive anything life throws at us. I need a partner, Penelope, not a decoration, and you are the finest partner I could imagine." A tear spilled down her cheek and she brushed it away impatiently. "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple," Yates admitted, "but it is real. What I feel for you is real, and I think what you feel for me is real too, even if you are afraid to admit it." Penelope let out a shaky laugh. "I am afraid," she confessed. "I am terrified. The last time I trusted a man with my heart, it destroyed my life." "I am not Robert," Yates said gently. "And you are not the same woman you were when you married him. We are both different people now, shaped by loss and survival. Maybe that means we have a chance to build something real." He held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. Penelope looked at it for a long moment, and Yates could see the war being fought behind her eyes. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, and Yates drew her closer, giving her every chance to pull away. When she did not, when she instead stepped into his arms, he wrapped them around her and held her as if she were something precious and fragile, even though he knew she was neither. They stood like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding each other in the lamplight while the first real snow of the season began to fall outside. When they finally pulled apart, Penelope looked up at him with eyes that held fear and hope in equal measure. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to trust this." "Then we will figure it out together," Yates said, and kissed her forehead gently. "No rush, no pressure, just us, taking it one day at a time." The winter that followed was hard, as Kansas winters always were, but it was also filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fires blazing in the hearths. Yates and Penelope's relationship developed slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate attention that came from two people who had both been hurt before and were determined not to make the same mistakes twice. They continued to work together in the evenings, but now their hands found excuses to touch. Their conversations wandered into more personal territory, and sometimes they simply sat together in comfortable silence, content just to be near each other. Yates courted Penelope with a patience he had not known he possessed, understanding that she needed time to believe this was real, that he was not going to suddenly transform into someone who would try to control or diminish her. The ranch hands watched this development with approval and amusement in equal measure. Miguel took to grinning knowingly whenever he saw them together, and Tommy went so far as to pick wildflowers one early spring day and leave them on Penelope's cabin doorstep with a note that read, "For the boss lady from the crew." Penelope had laughed until she cried, then arranged the wildflowers in a jar on her table where everyone could see them. By the time the first green shoots of spring appeared, Penelope had fully taken over the management of the ranch's business operations, freeing Yates to focus on the actual ranching. She handled the books, the supply ordering, the correspondence with buyers, and a dozen other tasks that Yates had been muddling through on his own. Under her management, the ranch's finances stabilized and then began to improve, her careful tracking of expenses and income revealing opportunities for savings and growth that Yates had missed. But it was more than just business competence that made her invaluable. Penelope had become the heart of the ranch in ways that went beyond cooking and accounting. She was the one the hands came to with their problems, the one who nursed them through illnesses, the one who remembered birthdays and wrote letters home for those who could not write themselves. She had transformed the ranch from a collection of men working together into something that felt like a family, and Yates watched this transformation with awe and growing love. On a warm May evening, Yates saddled 2 horses and invited Penelope to ride out with him to see the new calves. They rode together through the greening prairie, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Yates felt a contentment he had not experienced in years. This was what he had been missing without knowing it, this sense of completeness that came from sharing his life with someone who understood not just what he did, but why he did it. They stopped on a small rise overlooking the ranch, the buildings small and neat in the distance, the cattle dark shapes moving slowly across the grassland. Yates dismounted and helped Penelope down, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. She smiled up at him, the wariness that had characterized her early months at the ranch completely gone, replaced by a confidence and happiness that made her even more beautiful. "I have something to ask you," Yates said, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a young man courting Sarah. "Yes," Penelope said, her eyes curious. Yates took a deep breath and dropped to one knee on the prairie grass, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple gold with a single small diamond, the best he could afford after paying off Chester Williams but chosen with care. "Penelope Bartlett, you came to my ranch to cook for the hands, and you ended up running everything. You organized my business, fixed my systems, cared for my men, and somewhere in the middle of all that, you captured my heart completely. I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to settle for less than you deserve. I love the way you have made this ranch a home again. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner not just in business but in life?" Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them. "You are sure?" she asked. "You are sure you want to marry someone like me? Someone who will argue with you and challenge your decisions and never be content to just stay quietly in the background?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Yates said firmly. "I do not want a quiet, obedient wife. I want you exactly as you are." "Then yes," Penelope said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Owens. I will be your partner and your wife and probably a thorn in your side half the time, but I will love you with everything I have." Yates stood and kissed her properly for the first time, and the prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Penelope was wearing his ring, and Yates felt like the wealthiest man in Kansas despite the modest state of his bank account. They married in June in a simple ceremony in Lyndon's small church, with the entire ranch crew in attendance along with what felt like half the town. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers that Tommy had insisted on gathering. Yates wore his best suit, carefully brushed and pressed, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the joy that filled him was almost overwhelming. The celebration at the ranch afterward was raucous and heartfelt, with Miguel producing a fiddle that no one knew he owned and playing surprisingly competent dance music. Yates waltzed with his new wife under the stars, surrounded by the people who made up their extended family, and felt that everything he had survived, all the loss and hardship and struggle, had been worth it to bring him to this moment. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect, two people learning each other with patience and care, and when Penelope fell asleep in his arms in the big house that was now truly theirs together, Yates lay awake for a long time, grateful beyond measure for the stubborn woman who had arrived in a dusty wagon and proceeded to reorganize his entire life. The years that followed were good ones, though not without their challenges. The ranch continued to grow under their joint management, Yates handling the physical operation while Penelope managed the business side with increasing skill and confidence. They expanded their herd, improved their buildings, and began breeding horses in addition to cattle. Penelope's reputation for efficient management spread, and other ranchers began asking her advice on organization and record keeping. She helped several neighbors set up better systems, refusing payment but building relationships that strengthened the entire community. In the spring of 1880, Penelope announced that she was pregnant, and Yates felt joy mixed with terror. The memory of losing Sarah to fever was still sharp, and the idea of something happening to Penelope was almost unbearable. But Penelope faced pregnancy with the same practical determination she brought to everything else, consulting with the doctor in Lyndon regularly, and taking sensible precautions without becoming an invalid. Their son was born in January 1881, a robust baby with his father's strong features and his mother's dark eyes. They named him James, after Yates' father, and the boy proved to have lungs that could wake the entire ranch when he was displeased. Penelope managed motherhood the way she managed everything else, with competence and love in equal measure, though she insisted on continuing to oversee the ranch's business operations even with a baby in her arms. "I did not fight this hard for independence just to lose myself in motherhood," she told Yates when he suggested she might want to step back from her duties. "I can be a mother and still be myself. Women have been managing both since the beginning of time." Yates, who had learned early in their marriage that arguing with Penelope when she had that particular tone in her voice was futile, simply kissed her and agreed. And she was right, as usual. Penelope balanced motherhood and ranch management with a grace that seemed effortless, even though Yates knew it was anything but. Young James thrived, growing into a curious and active toddler who wanted to be involved in everything happening at the ranch. Miguel became an honorary grandfather, carving toys and telling stories in a mixture of English and Spanish that had James babbling in both languages. Tommy, now a full hand rather than the gangly youth he had been, proved surprisingly patient with the boy, letting James help with chores in ways that usually created more work, but built bonds that Yates treasured. In 1883, Penelope gave birth to twin daughters, Caroline and Elizabeth, and the ranch house filled with the chaos of 3 small children. Yates had never imagined himself as a father of 3, but watching Penelope with their children, seeing the way she somehow managed to give each of them individual attention while still running the ranch's operations with undiminished efficiency, filled him with admiration and love that grew deeper every day. The twins proved to have their mother's determined personality, and by the time they were 2 years old, they were already organizing their toys with a precision that made Penelope laugh and Yates shake his head in amused resignation. "They are your daughters," he told his wife. "They are our daughters," Penelope corrected, but she was smiling. "And they are going to be forces to be reckoned with." The ranch continued to prosper through the 1880s, weathering the occasional drought or harsh winter with the resilience that came from good management and careful planning. Penelope's systems proved their worth again and again, allowing them to anticipate problems and respond quickly when challenges arose. Other ranchers in the area had started coming to Penelope for advice, and she had developed something of a consulting practice, helping neighbors improve their operations while strengthening the network of relationships that made the community stronger. Yates watched his wife's reputation grow with pride. She had become known throughout the region as someone with exceptional business sense, and several ranchers had offered to pay her to manage their books and operations. She accepted a few clients whose ranches she could easily reach, bringing in additional income that she insisted on saving for their children's futures. "James, Caroline, and Elizabeth are going to have opportunities we never had," Penelope told Yates one evening as they went over the accounts together, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "They are going to have educations, choices, chances to be whatever they want to be." "Because of you," Yates said, covering her hand with his, "because you refuse to let circumstances define you." Penelope squeezed his hand, her eyes soft. "Because of us," she corrected. "You gave me the chance to prove what I could do. You trusted me when I needed trust. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. We built this together, Yates." Those quiet evening conversations remained one of Yates' favorite parts of their life together. After the children were asleep, and the ranch had settled for the night, he and Penelope would sit together in the office that had become their shared space, going over books and plans and dreams. Sometimes they talked business, sometimes they talked about the children, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content just to be together. In 1887, when James was 6 and the twins were 4, Penelope announced that she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy, as another son joined the family that autumn. They named him Thomas, after young Tommy Fredericks, who had become such an integral part of their lives. Tommy himself was so moved by the honor that he actually teared up, which caused considerable teasing from the other hands, until Penelope put a stop to it with a look that could have frozen fire. The late 1880s brought new challenges to Kansas ranching. Increased competition, falling cattle prices, and a series of harsh winters tested every rancher in the region. But the systems Penelope had established allowed them to weather these difficulties better than most. Her careful record-keeping had built up reserves during good years. Her network of relationships provided mutual support during hard times, and her willingness to diversify their operations meant they were not entirely dependent on cattle prices. She also continued to innovate in ways that impressed Yates. When she noticed that the wives and daughters of neighboring ranchers often had valuable skills but no way to monetize them, she organized a cooperative where women could sell baked goods, preserves, and handcrafts to passing travelers and merchants. The cooperative became surprisingly successful, providing income to families who needed it while creating another revenue stream for the ranch, which provided the meeting space and organization. "You are not content to just succeed yourself," Yates observed one day, watching Penelope coordinate a cooperative meeting with efficiency and warmth. "You want everyone around you to succeed too." "A rising tide lifts all boats," Penelope replied. "If our neighbors prosper, we all benefit. Besides, these women deserve the chance to build something of their own, just like I did." Yates pulled her close, marveling as always at the generosity of spirit that lived alongside her fierce independence. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Penelope replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Even when you track mud through my clean kitchen." "That was one time," Yates protested. "It was 3 times," Penelope corrected, but she was smiling. The 1890s arrived with new challenges and opportunities. The railroad expansion was changing the economics of ranching, making it easier to ship cattle, but also bringing more competition. Yates and Penelope adapted, focusing on quality over quantity and building relationships with buyers who appreciated their reputation for well-managed herds and honest dealing. Their children were growing, each developing distinct personalities. James, now 10, showed his father's love for the physical work of ranching and could already rope and ride better than some of the hands. The twins, Caroline and Elizabeth, were 8 and inseparable, with Caroline showing Penelope's head for numbers while Elizabeth had a gift for working with animals. Young Thomas, at 4, was still finding his way but already demonstrated the same determination that characterized both his parents. In the spring of 1891, Chester Williams returned to Lyndon. Yates heard about it from the sheriff, who rode out to the ranch personally to deliver the warning. "Thought you should know," Sheriff Henderson said. "He has been asking questions about you and your wife. Claims he was cheated out of money years ago and wants compensation." Yates felt old anger stir but kept his voice calm. "I paid him what he claimed he was owed back in 1878. He has no legitimate claim on us." "I know that, and you know that," Henderson said. "But Chester is drinking heavy and talking reckless. Just wanted to warn you to be careful." Yates thanked the sheriff and immediately went to find Penelope, who was in the barn showing James how to check a horse's hooves. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made her hand James off to Miguel and follow Yates outside. When he told her about Chester's return, Penelope's face went pale, then hard. "I had hoped never to deal with him again." "You will not have to," Yates said firmly. "I will handle this." "No," Penelope said. "We will handle this together. I am not the frightened widow I was 13 years ago, Yates. I am not going to hide while you deal with my past." They discussed their options and decided to confront Chester directly, on their terms rather than waiting for him to make a move. The next day, they rode into Lyndon together and found Chester in the saloon, already drunk despite the early hour. "Hello, Chester," Penelope said, her voice cold and controlled. "I hear you have been asking about me." Chester looked up with bleary eyes that sharpened when he recognized her. "Penelope, or should I say Mrs. Owens now, you have done well for yourself, marrying a rich rancher." "My husband's financial status is none of your concern," Penelope said. "What do you want?" "Justice," Chester said, standing unsteadily. "I was owed money and I was paid in blood money to go away, but that debt is still there, still unpaid." "I paid you what you claimed you were owed," Yates said, moving to stand beside Penelope. "And you took it willingly. You have no further claim on my wife or on me." "Your wife," Chester said mockingly. "She was Robert's wife first. Everything she has, everything you have, it is all built on money that should have been mine." "You are drunk and delusional," Penelope said. "And I am done being afraid of you. Whatever hold you think you have over me, whatever guilt or shame you imagine I carry, it is gone. I built a new life here, a good life, and you have no place in it. Go back to wherever you came from, Chester, before you make things worse for yourself." Chester lunged forward, but he was too slow and too drunk, and Yates caught him easily, shoving him back into his chair. "Touch my wife and I will break your arm," Yates said conversationally. "Threaten her again and I will do worse. The sheriff knows you are here, knows you have been making threats. One word from us and you will be in jail. Is that really how you want this to end?" Chester glared at them both, but the fight had gone out of him. He was just a sad, broken man nursing old grievances and impossible dreams. "You owe me," he muttered one more time, but without conviction. "I owe you nothing," Penelope said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. "Goodbye, Chester." They walked out of the saloon together, and Yates felt Penelope trembling beside him. When they reached their horses, she turned and buried her face in his chest. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I was terrified he would still have power over me." "But he does not," Yates said, holding her close. "You faced him down, and he was just a pathetic drunk. You are stronger than anything in your past, Penelope. You always have been." Chester Williams left Lyndon 2 days later, and they never heard from him again. Years later, they would learn that he had died in Denver, penniless and alone, but by then it was just a footnote to a past that no longer had any hold on them. Life continued at the ranch with the rhythms of work and family, seasons and growth. James grew into a capable young man who took on more responsibility with the cattle and horses, showing the same steady competence his father had always displayed. The twins developed into intelligent, capable young women who were equally comfortable helping their mother with the books or their father with the ranch work. Young Thomas, growing fast, showed signs of inheriting his mother's organizational genius, constantly rearranging the barn and corrals into more efficient configurations. In 1895, when Penelope was 40 and Yates was 42, they sat together on the porch of the main house one summer evening, watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching his younger siblings to rope a practice post, with the twins offering contradictory advice that Thomas was ignoring in favor of his own methodology. "We have built something good here," Penelope said quietly, her hand finding Yates automatically. "We have," Yates agreed. "Something that will last beyond us." "I never thought I would have this," Penelope continued. "When I arrived here 17 years ago, I was just hoping to survive. I never imagined I would find love, build a family, create something meaningful." "You did more than create something meaningful," Yates said. "You transformed this ranch, this community, and my life. Everything good that has happened here traces back to the day you climbed down from that wagon and announced you were going to be my cook." Penelope laughed. "And ended up running everything." "Including my heart," Yates finished, pulling her close. "Especially my heart." They sat together as the sun set over the Kansas prairie, casting long shadows across land they had worked together to build into something prosperous and enduring. The sounds of their children's laughter filled the air, and in the distance, the cattle moved slowly across the grassland, dark shapes against the golden light. Miguel came out of the bunkhouse, saw them on the porch, and waved. Tommy emerged behind him, now a senior hand, and married himself to a girl from town, with a baby on the way. Other hands came and went over the years, but the core of the operation remained solid, built on the foundation that Penelope had established and the relationships she had fostered. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, seeing the thoughtful expression on Penelope's face. "About how life is strange," she said. "How the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if you are brave enough to keep moving forward." "Losing everything in St. Louis felt like the end of my life, but it was really just the beginning." "I am grateful for it," Yates said, "though I wish you had not had to suffer to get here." "The suffering made me who I am," Penelope said. "It taught me to value what matters and fight for it. It taught me that I could survive anything. And it brought me to you." They kissed as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and their children made exaggerated sounds of disgust that made them both laugh. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, Yates thought. These ordinary, precious moments with the woman who had changed his life and the family they had built together. The years rolled on with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1898, James married a neighbor's daughter, a practical young woman named Sarah, whom Penelope approved of immediately. They built a house on the ranch property, and James took on more of the day-to-day cattle operations, allowing Yates to focus on the horse breeding that had become his passion in later years. The twins, now 17, were being courted by various young men from surrounding ranches, much to their father's consternation and their mother's amusement. Caroline announced her intention to attend a business college in Kansas City, determined to bring formal training to the practical education her mother had given her. Elizabeth wanted to stay on the ranch and work with the horses, showing a gift for training that impressed even the most experienced hands. Thomas, at 12, was already helping his mother with the ranch accounts and showing an entrepreneurial streak that reminded Yates of Penelope. He had started raising chickens as a side business, selling eggs in town, and carefully tracking his income and expenses in a ledger that would have made his mother proud. In the spring of 1899, Penelope turned 44 and Yates turned 46. They celebrated quietly, with just family, and afterwards sat together in their office going over the accounts as they had done for 20 years. "We have done well," Penelope said, looking at the numbers that represented 2 decades of work and partnership. "The ranch is worth 10 times what it was when I arrived. We have money saved for the children's futures. We have built something that will last. And we have done it together," Yates said. "Every bit of it together." "I would not have wanted it any other way," Penelope said, smiling at him with eyes that still held the same determination and intelligence that had captured his attention all those years ago, but now also held peace and contentment. They made love that night with the easy familiarity of long partnership, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, taking comfort and pleasure in equal measure. Afterward, lying in bed with Penelope's head on his chest, Yates thought about how miraculous it was that this brilliant, fierce woman had chosen to share her life with him. "What are you thinking?" Penelope asked, her voice drowsy. "That I am the luckiest man in Kansas," Yates said. "Good answer," Penelope murmured. And then she was asleep. Yates lay awake a while longer, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of her against him, and thanking whatever providence had brought that dusty wagon into his yard 21 years ago. The new century arrived with both excitement and trepidation. The world was changing fast, with new technologies and ideas transforming how people lived and worked. Yates and Penelope adapted as they always had, incorporating new methods where they made sense while holding on to the core values that had made the ranch successful. They installed a telephone in 1900, which Penelope immediately put to use for business communications, building relationships with buyers and suppliers across the region. James expanded the cattle operation, implementing new breeding techniques he had learned from agricultural extension agents. The twins pursued their different paths, Caroline thriving in Kansas City, while Elizabeth built a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the state. Thomas grew into a capable young man with his mother's business sense and his father's steady character. At 16, he was managing several profitable side ventures while still helping with the core ranch operations, and both parents knew he would be ready to take on significant responsibility when the time came. In 1905, Yates woke one morning feeling tired in a way that went beyond the normal weariness of ranch work. He said nothing to Penelope, not wanting to worry her, but she noticed anyway. She always noticed. "You need to see the doctor," she said that evening. "I am fine," Yates protested. "Just getting older." "We are both getting older," Penelope said, "but this is different. Please, Yates, for me." He could not refuse her anything when she used that tone. So he rode into Lyndon and saw Dr. Morris, who examined him with thorough professionalism before delivering news that Yates had suspected but hoped to avoid. "Your heart is not as strong as it should be," Morris said. "You need to take things easier, reduce stress, and accept that you cannot work the way you did when you were younger." Yates told Penelope that evening, and she immediately began reorganizing the ranch operations to reduce his workload. James took over the day-to-day cattle management entirely. Thomas stepped up to handle tasks that required physical effort. Penelope herself made sure Yates stuck to the doctor's orders, managing his schedule with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. "I feel like an invalid," Yates complained one afternoon when Penelope insisted he rest instead of helping repair a fence. "You are not an invalid," Penelope said firmly. "You are a man with a heart condition who needs to be sensible. We have built this ranch to run without depending on any one person. Let it work the way it was designed to work." Yates grumbled but obeyed, and gradually adjusted to his new limitations. He focused on the horses, which required less physical labor, and spent more time on the business planning that had always been his and Penelope's shared passion. If anything, their partnership deepened during this period, as they relied on each other even more fully. The years from 1905 to 1910 were good ones despite Yates' health concerns. James and Sarah had 2 children, giving Yates and Penelope grandchildren who filled the ranch with new life and laughter. Caroline married a banker from Kansas City, but maintained her connections to the ranch, visiting regularly and bringing her business expertise to help modernize their operations. Elizabeth married one of the ranch hands and stayed on the property, continuing to build the horse training business into a significant profit center. Thomas, at 24, was being courted by the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart young woman who reminded Yates of Penelope in her youth. In the spring of 1912, Yates turned 59 and Penelope turned 56. They celebrated with a large gathering that included not just family but many of the people whose lives they had touched over the years. Former ranch hands, business associates, members of Penelope's cooperative, neighbors who had benefited from her advice, all came to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Miguel, now 70 and officially retired though he still puttered around the ranch daily, made a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. "I remember when the boss hired a lady cook," he said. "We all thought she would last maybe a month. Instead, she took over everything, organized us all, and made this ranch what it is today. But more than that, she made it a home. She and Boss Yates together, they showed us what a real partnership looks like. They are the reason we all want to stay here to be part of what they have built." Penelope was crying openly by the end of the speech, and Yates had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. "Thank you all," he managed finally. "Thank you for being part of our family, our extended family that goes far beyond blood. Penelope and I could not have built any of this without you." That night, lying in bed, Penelope turned to Yates with a serious expression. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything," Yates replied. "Promise me that if something happens to you, you will not worry about me. I have proven I can survive anything. I have built a life that is not dependent on any one person, even you. So if your heart finally decides it has done enough, you can go in peace knowing I will be all right." Yates felt tears prick his eyes. "I know you will be all right. You are the strongest person I have ever known, but that does not mean I want to leave you." "I do not want you to leave me either," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "I want us to have 20 more years together. But if we do not get that, I want you to know that these 34 years have been the best of my life. You gave me everything I needed when I needed it most. You loved me, trusted me, respected me, and built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams. Whatever time we have left, I am grateful for every moment." They held each other close that night, two people who had faced loss and hardship and come out stronger, who had built something lasting together, who loved each other with a depth that only grew with time. Yates' heart held out for 5 more good years. 5 years of grandchildren and horses, of quiet evenings with Penelope and raucous family dinners, of watching the ranch continue to thrive under the combined management of their children. He was able to see Thomas marry his sweetheart, to welcome more grandchildren into the family, to watch as everything he and Penelope had built together proved its lasting strength. He died peacefully in his sleep one night in October 1917, with Penelope beside him where she had been every night for 39 years. She woke to find him gone, and the grief was sharp and immediate, but underneath it was gratitude for the life they had shared and confidence in the future they had secured. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the respect Yates had earned in the community. But it was Penelope's eulogy that everyone remembered, her voice strong despite her tears as she spoke of the man who had given her a chance when she had nothing, who had loved her not despite her strength but because of it, who had been her partner in every sense of the word. "He was my heart," she said simply, "and I was his. We built something beautiful together, and it will endure long after we are both gone." Penelope lived for another 13 years after Yates' death, continuing to manage the business side of the ranch with undiminished competence. She saw her grandchildren grow into adults, welcomed great-grandchildren, and continued to be a pillar of the community. But everyone who knew her understood that part of her was waiting to rejoin the man who had been her partner and her love for nearly 4 decades. She died peacefully in the summer of 1930, at the age of 74, surrounded by the family she and Yates had created together. Her last words were, "I am coming, Yates," and there was a smile on her face as she went. They buried her beside Yates on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the headstone reads simply, "Penelope Bartlett Owens, 1856–1930. She came to cook and ended up running everything, including his heart." The ranch continued for generations after them, managed by their descendants who had learned from Penelope's example the value of competence, determination, and the kind of partnership that makes anything possible. The systems she had established, the relationships she had built, the community she had strengthened, all of it endured as testament to what one woman with courage and intelligence could accomplish when given the chance. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Kansas prairie, casting golden light across the land that Yates and Penelope had worked together to build into something lasting, their great-grandchildren would tell stories about the remarkable woman who had arrived in a dusty wagon looking for work, and ended up creating a legacy that would span generations. She had come to cook for the ranch hands and ended up running everything, including the heart of the man who had given her a second chance at life and love. Their love story became legend in that part of Kansas, passed down through the years as an example of what real partnership looked like, of how two people who had both suffered loss could find each other and build something beautiful together. It was a story of resilience and determination, of taking chances and trusting love even when it seemed risky, of building a life together one day at a time with patience and respect and deepening affection. Yates and Penelope's legacy was not just the prosperous ranch they had built, though that was significant. It was not just the family they had raised, though their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward their values and their strength. Their real legacy was the proof that love could flourish even in harsh circumstances, That partnership between equals could create something greater than either person could achieve alone, and that taking a chance on someone who needed one could change not just one life but generations to come. The woman who had arrived desperate and determined, looking for nothing more than a job cooking for ranch hands, had found so much more. She had found purpose, community, respect, and a love that endured through decades and beyond death. And the man who had taken a chance on her had found the partner he needed to transform his ranch from a struggling operation into a thriving enterprise, and more importantly, had found the love that made his life complete. Their story was one of transformation and growth, of two damaged people healing each other through partnership and trust. It was about building something lasting in a hard land, about creating family from a collection of individuals, about the power of competence and determination combined with love and respect. And it was ultimately about the simple truth that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone who needs one, from being open to possibility even when it appears unexpectedly, from building together rather than trying to go it alone. The ranch that Penelope and Yates built together stood for more than a century after they were gone, and the town of Lyndon, Kansas never forgot the remarkable couple who had transformed not just their own lives but the entire community around them. Their story was told and retold, adapted and embellished, but the core remained the same, a testament to the enduring power of love, partnership, and the courage to build a new life from the ashes of the old. And if on certain evenings, when the light was just right, and the wind carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers, some people claimed they could see two figures on horseback riding together across the range, holding hands as they surveyed the land they had worked so hard to build into something lasting. Well, that was just one more part of the legend. The legend of the woman who came to cook for the ranch hands and ended up running everything, including the heart of the man who loved her, and of the man who gave her the chance to become everything she was meant to be. Their love story was complete, spanning decades of partnership, challenges overcome together, joy shared and multiplied, and a legacy that would endure for generations. They had built something beautiful together in that wild Kansas land, something that proved the power of taking chances on people, of respecting strength in unexpected packages, of building partnerships based on equality and mutual respect, and above all, of loving with everything you have and building a life together one day at a time.